What's up, everyone? Today we're turning the clock back a bit again to talk about The Running Man from 1987. Only a modest hit in its day, but obviously this is a highly influential film. I mean, it's been at least vaguely imitated about a dozen times in the last 10 years alone. Even if you feel a bit burnt out on this premise, I still think this is worth a look, not necessarily out of reverence, but because, in my opinion, it remains one of the most entertaining versions of this concept. Full disclosure, this was all new information to me going into this review, but the director, Paul Michael Glaser, he would be familiar to most people, I would think, as Dave Starsky from Starsky and Hutch. Anyway, he apparently took a break from acting and stepped behind the camera for like a 10-year stretch there, during which he gave us gems like Cutting Edge. Anybody remember The Cutting Edge? Yeah, that's what I thought. The Air Up There, Kazam. So with Running Man now in the bag, I've apparently covered almost Paul Michael Glaser's entire filmography as a director, despite myself. All this to say, The Running Man is his best filmmaking effort by, light years. It's well-paced, with crisp, colorful cinematography, and an overall production and costume design that holds up surprisingly well by today's standards. The satirical tone is well maintained throughout the movie, with lots of jabs at media and society that still feel valid, but the movie never feels like it's lecturing you. It allows the satire to speak for itself, which is what allows it to also function as a fun sci-fi action movie that doesn't think itself above some crowd-pleasing entertainment. It's worth noting that this approach to the movie was adopted after the lead was switched from Christopher Reeve to Arnold Schwarzenegger. But personally, I still think even with Reeve in the lead, this would have been the right approach. Although it does kind of explain why Arnold's wit as Ben Richards seems to fluctuate throughout the movie. I love Arnold, but some of these one-liners were clearly written with someone like Christopher Reeve in mind. Sometimes that sits uneasily alongside the more sort of standard lame pun dad humor that kind of became Arnold's trademark. I mean, it's not like the more finesse dialogue is coming out of like Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing or anything like that. But, it's kind of the difference between dad jokes and goofy uncle jokes. But Arnold is a committed professional if there ever was one. And Ben Richards is a very dogged and determined character who feels a little less hyper macho and a little more human and relatable than a lot of the other kinds of roles that Arnold was playing during this period of his career. The supporting cast is really solid too. Richard Dawson, by many accounts, was not actually very far off from the villain Damon Killian in his real-life career at one point. I'm not going to get into that call, but I will say he's perfect here, inhabiting the role without any difficulty. Maria Conchita Alonso gives the character Amber a lot more depth than I think was even written for her. And Jesse Ventura and Jim Brown both appear to be having fun in their scenes as Captain Freedom and Fireball, respectively. Ben's two companions that tag along in the game don't leave the same kind of impression, but honestly, they don't really have to. In a lowbrow, on-the-nose satire like this, characters should be exactly as they appear to be on the surface, no more. Some might argue that that comes at the expense of any real feeling of stakes or dramatic weight. But when you're working with a premise that's so cartoonish and outlandish, I sort of feel like taking the material too seriously would be a fatal mistake. Now, the action choreography might not necessarily be the fanciest stuff you've ever seen. And in fact, if you compare it to some of the set pieces that John McTiernan staged in Predator, which was released the same year, this can feel a little bit more utilitarian and lightweight. Also, coincidentally, both movies about human prey as sport. But anyway, even if it is a little bit more scaled down here, Glaser still films all the action in a very clear, fluid way. And the stunt work, as nearly as I can tell, is all practical, so you still have to respect that. It's almost a little unsettling how much more accurate this movie feels in terms of contemporary culture. There's even a point where Arnold taunts Killian as being cancelled, and honestly, it feels like it's torn right from today's headlines and internet trends. It was a little bit spooky, it kind of took me aback. Despite its continued influence, this isn't really a movie that comes up all that much where Arnold films are discussed. Which I suspect might be because it was in fact overshadowed by Predator. Also, of course, there's the inescapable irony that The Running Man probably does feel over-familiar to today's audiences, even though it's the very movie that popularized the now familiar concept in the first place. But in my opinion, it can sit alongside the rest of Arnold's 80s hits just fine. My final thought here pertains to one of the main criticisms that these kinds of stories always seem to invite, which is that the story is in fact sensationalizing violence in the same way that it is criticizing society for doing. To which I ask, yeah, and so what? Movies and every other form of fiction are make-believe. It is perfectly okay to have your cake and eat it too in this instance. Who cares? And yeah, I mean, God forbid a satire also function as an entertaining action film. To paraphrase something I heard Joe Bob Briggs say, this is a movie, not a grad school thesis. There's hundreds of highbrow science fiction movies out there if that's what you want. I'll take both. Sometimes I need a movie like Predestination or Ex Machina. Other times, I need one like this. Lean entertainment built around an outlandish concept. Thanks for watching, guys. I do plan to have more coming your way soon. Take care.